Good morning and welcome to today's debate with EU40 and Parliament Magazine. We're looking ahead to Sunday's summit meeting. We're going to be discussing the implication of Brexit and the outcome of the summit. On the panel today we have Charles Tannock, a Conservative member and a member of the ECR group. We also have Seb Dance, a member of the Labour Party and the S&D group. And also we have Fredrick Federley, a member of the ALDE group. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
First of all, question to Fredrick. From a Swedish perspective, what are your thoughts on how Brexit is going and the negotiations?
Well,
swimmingly.
On how it's going, Sweden and Britain are long-standing friends. No matter which ones of these guys who were in government, we were close allies, political friends, having a sound view of the development of the European Union and what pace to develop the European Union. We're losing one of our biggest political allies, and also on economical basis, it's devastating if we go for a no deal. In one snap, Sweden will lose 180 million euros at least in trade. We'll lose 8,500 jobs like this. So it's also not just an issue domestically for the UK, it's for the whole Union. And this is just the initial effects it will have on the Swedish market. I'm actually concerned that we are politically starting off the global recess we will see in a few years. We don't know when it will start, but we might politically start it in advance in Europe if we are not able to settle this.
And what about the languages that's being used with the Brexit debate in the UK, especially describing EU nationals as jumping the queue and wrapping free movement with immigration issues as well, considering there's a sizable Swedish population in Britain as well?
There's a considerable amount of Swedes living in the UK and also running businesses in the UK. They are, of course, very, very anxious now about what's happening. I have several friends who have been, for the last 2 years, trying to prove how long they've been staying in the UK so they can actually get the right to stay no matter what might be the outcome. Well, basically for Sweden, this is a great loss. We see it as a divorce, which is unnecessarily. I think there should have been ways of working across the issues we have at hand. Several of the issues that has been raised by the UK public, where EU is not developing in the right way, is supported by many other countries, by the Netherlands, by Denmark, by Sweden, by Finland, by the Baltic states, and so on. But now we're losing our strongest ally, and that might actually tip it in totally wrong direction.
Right. There's the upcoming summit meeting on Sunday, where the EU27 should agree on a uniform exit deal. However, Spain are coming up with last-minute issues.
Yeah.
France is Spain concerning Gibraltar. France is talking about fishing rights. Do you think there will be a deal from EU27 on Sunday?
Well, there has to be at some point, otherwise we'll go for a no deal. And for us, who's losing out on our favorite partner in the European Union, and if you by any chance would like to change your mind, I welcome you back at any given moment.
Good,
without any punishment. There has to be a way forward, and I think that the main obstacles is actually not within the European Union. I see the Gibraltar issue, I see the fisheries, I see medicines, I'm also working on agriculture and climate and so on, where I've been working together with colleagues from both your parties very, very nicely, almost as it was my own party, because there's also a cultural understanding between our countries which makes negotiations easy. The troublesome part is actually what's going on within the UK at the moment, and we have always respected the UK so much, almost like a bigger brother. At the moment, it seems like it's a younger brother in the teenagers trying to put itself into some kind of
extremist madness.
Yeah. You put it more frankly than I did.
Well, Charles, coming to you. During the referendum, Northern Ireland was not discussed at all. And now it's one of those issues where we can't seem to get beyond. Do you think Theresa May can come up with a solution that will, get the backing of both the DUP and the Republic of Ireland and the EU, or is that impossible?
Well, of course, I did talk about it during the campaign, but of course nobody was listening to people like me. And subsequently, I've acquired an Irish passport through my mother, who's Irish, so I'm very lucky in that respect. I wrote a paper recently on the Irish border and Northern Ireland. If the DUP had any sense, which they clearly don't, By the way, they're a very poor fit with the Conservative Party. I always predicted that would be a problem as well. they would, of course, wake up, smell the coffee, and be delighted that Northern Ireland would have a special economic status of being in the single market and in the customs union. It'd be a magnet for foreign direct investment. It'd be a huge competition with the Republic and so on. But no, of course, they're so obsessed about being exactly the same as the rest of the United Kingdom when it suits them. Because in the past, they wanted to have lower corporation tax rates. They want to have VAT rates harmonized with the Republic and so on. They have different laws on abortion, on same-sex marriage, etc. So when it suits them, they're with the Brexiteers. They're kind of flying the kind of patriotic, ultra-patriotic Orangeman flag, as it were. But so, no, I mean, they feel obviously betrayed, but it was inevitable you couldn't square that circle. It's absolutely inevitable that if you are to have a totally open border with no impediments, no structures, Northern Ireland will have to have some light touch regulatory checks, even if the whole of the UK stays in the customs union, which is the now proposed backstop which Mrs May has come up with as a concession, which could be indefinite because you can't unilaterally withdraw from it. Inevitably, Northern Ireland will have to be totally aligned to the degree necessary to keep that border open. Otherwise, you have a closed border, which is what the Brexit extremists in the RG want, and you risk returning to the troubles of the 1970s. I'm old enough to remember IRA terrorism.
Right. Some people have described this as the biggest crisis since Suez. What's it like to be a member of a party which has now been described as Dad's Army? I mean, it must be really tough for you.
Listen, I know that I'm quite old. I mean, I've been in this place. I've been in this place 20 years, and I suppose it's probably time to sort of, put up my clogs and retire. But and I will be compulsorily retired as a result of the referendum, unless we can stop, this Brexit madness. But I'm in favour of people's vote. And certainly, I do think when I saw that picture of all these Brexiteers, ERG lot, chaired by Rees-Mogg, it did look kind of pale, male and stale, to use the expression now. I mean, Britain has moved on. It's a very different place. Young people don't like this idea of reverting to sort of nationalist, populist slogans.
Right.
They don't believe that there is some kind of global Britain in the Anglosphere and Empire Mark II project. This is really a pure fantasy that was cooked up by the Brexiteers, led by people like Daniel Hannan in this parliament and others, that somehow Australia and Canada are desperate to re-establish those kind of mother country links, the kindreds, the kind of kith and kin line of history.
Australia's a very different place.
Australia's becoming a very different place. They're having more people emigrate to Australia from China and Southeast Asia than they are from the United Kingdom. Demographically, it's changing and becoming more like its a regional, location in Southeast Asia, which is where it's located. So this is trying to put the clock back. Putting the clock back is always going to be problematic. And, we are trying to give up our closest market of the single market of more than 400 million people in 27 countries, some of the richest countries in the world, in the hope that there is some kind of Anglosphere, Empire Mark II out there ready to rescue us in the Commonwealth. It's just not going to happen.
Sure. Coming to you, Seb, you are openly for a second referendum. You're campaigning on it. How realistic is it for the British Parliament to vote for it, considering your own leader has not openly come out in support?
Well, I mean, look, you've got to look at Labour's policy, both the letter of it, but also the direction of travel. In terms of what the policy is, it's fairly clear-cut. First we seek a general election in the event of the deal being voted down, which I think is the most likely outcome in terms of the House of Commons vote. If we don't get a general election, then all options are on the table, including, of course, a public vote with the option to remain. And I think that what you've clearly got to remember in terms of the first tenet of that policy is that in order to get a general election, you need the votes of 2/3 of the House of Commons.
Under the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
Under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which of course the Conservative Party at the moment is unlikely, I would say, to vote for a general election. So for that reason, I think it's more likely than not that the Labour Party will back a people's vote eventually.
But isn't there some Labour MEPs, especially from the northern regions, which are Brexit?
MEPs or
MPs, sorry, from the northern region, who are actually against a referendum, and couldn't May rely on them to pass through
but I think
the exit agreement?
Numbers are tiny.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Snell.
Well, so look, we've got to understand. Charles and I represent London. London is
Different.
Different.
Right.
It voted Remain. Incidentally, so did all of the big cities in England: Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle,
Sure.
etc., etc. However, I do have a lot of sympathy for colleagues who represent Leave seats. There's two things I would say. Firstly, you've got to remember that the majority of Labour voters in Leave seats voted Remain.
Right.
And secondly, this conversation isn't something that's being contrasted with the 2016 referendum. It's not as if we have the 2016 referendum, we see the result and we go, no, actually, I think we should have another referendum. This is a completely different process. This is about saying we had the referendum in 2016, we knew that the proposition that was put to people was undeliverable, but nonetheless, at the end of this process, we have in front of us 585 pages that spell out in black and white what Brexit is. And this is now a very different proposition to 2016, because we can say to people, this is what Brexit really is, not the fantasies and the promises. This is what remaining looks like. And that is the choice that I think many of my colleagues, even in Leave areas, would be happy with.
But then
Informed consent we use in the medical practice.
Okay, but we're still running out of time, aren't we? Because we're going to be out by March.
But it was always going to be this way. I mean, when you talk to colleagues in other member states, of course, they have constitutions in many countries that prevent this kind of madness. You have, for example, supermajorities when it comes to big constitutional change. You have constitutional courts. You have ways of checking, regional parliaments, regional assemblies, ways of checking that what is happening still has public consent. We don't have that. We only have votes in the House of Commons at the end of the process. So it was always going to be like
So
that.
is your line, you prefer to see a second referendum than rather Corbyn, we have an election where Corbyn comes into power, but if he does come into power, what guarantees he's going to get a better deal compared to Theresa May, since Merkel's already said this is the best you're going to get?
I mean, I don't think a general election is likely, but we will push for one. And obviously, as a member of the Labour Party, I would always want a general election. No offence, Charles, but obviously I would believe that a Labour government would be better.
I think it's very unlikely that the Conservative MPs, having just been re-elected for 5 years, want to subject themselves to another one.
So I would prefer a Labour government, of course, but I'm realistic. I don't think a general election is very likely. But if it were to happen, then obviously in terms of our manifesto, I would push very clearly, and there are many of us campaigning within the Labour Party, to have a people's vote as part of the manifesto. But secondly, it is not possible for a Labour government, even a fantastically brilliant, wonderful Labour government, to be able to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement in the time we have left to suit the red lines that we as a party have, which are very different to the current government. So in that respect, I think a people's vote is the only realistic option.
Okay. Coming back to you, Charles, if the EU 27 agree on Sunday, and we presume they do, on a exit deal, is Theresa May going to be able to still survive? And also, she's got this strategy of a no deal is better than a bad deal. How long can she come up with that negotiating position vis-a-vis your party?
Well, I think we really have to exclude this idea that no deal is better than a bad deal. I mean, clearly, no deal is a catastrophe for the economy. And Amber Rudd, who has just re-entered the British government, having been Home Secretary, she's back in government, and she said from government that there isn't the majority in the House of Commons. There's a very large majority against a no deal. So I think that no deal is almost impossible given the parliamentary arithmetic. But I also agree that I can't really see where the numbers are for Mrs May to get her deal through. So we are in a constitutional crisis situation. I, like Seb, agree that the only easy way of solving this is a second referendum, a people's vote. And obviously the battle then will be to make sure Remain is on the ballot paper, because there will be people in the Conservative government, in the Labour Party leadership, who would like just to have the deal versus no deal, which of course is a binary false choice. We should be able to say, well, what we've got now is the best of all worlds, etc.
I'd say the Labour Party position is very clear to rule out no deal. So I don't think there would be a danger of the Labour Party.
Certainly in my party, that's what they would default to. The Brexiteers, that it would have to be no deal. A no deal versus Mrs May's deal, in order to get round the fact that she's lost the vote in the Commons, to kind of bring it back to the Commons via a plebiscite. But I think there is a chance now. I mean, the exact mechanisms remain to be seen, whether it can be done in the very narrow space of time available. The UCL Constitutional Union has said 22 to 26 weeks. You could just about get that in by the beginning of May. You need the 27 to give you a 6-week extension.
I was just say, we might be asking our good friends in the EU27 to grant us a little extension.
A short
for
extension
the
of Article
purpose
50. You may need a 6-month extension of Article
Which
50,
was
which
said in
is much
Swedish
more
media
complicated.
yesterday.
Then you're up
that
against
you need
European
more
elections.
time.
But also, Fredrick, coming to you, I mean, what's the role going to be, for instance, if she does get through Parliament?
Yeah.
It comes back in the British Parliament. It comes back to the EU, and the Commission will have to come up with a position paper. Your leader, Guy Verhofstadt, has already said he likes what he's seen offered by the Commission. Are we seriously going to see the European Parliament rubber stamp this deal, considering people like Seb and Dance don't want to have a second referendum?
Well, I would say it's two different play fields totally. The European Union, the 27 who's left behind, so to say, are in our mindset, UK has left. We're planning the Common Agricultural Policy without the UK. We're planning the MFF, the long-term budget.
The elections without the UK.
Yeah, elections
23rd
without
of May.
Yesterday, the plan for changing the premises when you guys are no longer here and need your offices was approved. The plan is ongoing.
Right.
And I think that's one part of which is important for the UK debate, that the EU is moving ahead. This will create big troubles for us. Probably huge economic losses. I can't even. I'm one of those boring guys who works on proper legislation.
Right.
Looking at all the legislation that has been put in place for 40 years of the UK membership, changing that to national law, that will take decades, probably decades. And we are talking everything from insulin for diabetic, any kind of medicine, talking about food, animal transport. You will soon have horse breeders coming angry as as angry as you can get, coming and saying, we didn't realize that we are not able to trade with our first-class horses anymore because we have no regulation for it. Everything is, people would be astonished knowing how many rules and regulations you need to keep an open market. The idea that there are no rules in the market, that's just...
But that was the big dishonesty of the Brexiteers. They said it'd be quick, it'd be easy, and that Britain held all the cards. We held all the cards. And that, you guys would be begging us for a deal, not the other way around.
No. We're moving ahead. We're sad. We'd like to welcome you at any given moment. And also in Swedish media yesterday, I said on the direct question, if more time is needed, I said, let's provide more time because this is more serious than keeping to a stupid date. But in case of the worst happens, you will leave, and there will be a deal for it. It's a Strasbourg session week when you leave. I plan to stay to the Friday because we have so many good friends, both in the Tories and in Lib Dems and also in the Labour Party. So we'd like to have a proper goodbye.
It's a very destructive and selfish process.
It's very
unscrambling 45 years of building something together.
But also
and UK is in chaos while the EU is moving ahead.
And you have to. You have to.
But one final question for all three of you. The forces that drove Brexit, the populism, are you scared it will affect the next European elections?
Populism will of course affect it, but and especially as ALDE, being a centrist, liberal means something a little bit different in the UK. Basically on social issues and green issues, a liberal in Sweden is one who votes closer to S&D, and on economy and finances and so on, totally votes with the Tories.
Free market.
Free marketeers, free traders and so on. Our core is to protect the European values, and that is democracy, openness, transparency, freedom of press, media, equality among all citizens and so on. And that's the big fight we're going to have in the election. I would like to have you guys on board because you have proven so many times that you can do it both in practice and in policy. And it will be a loss actually for us, but we will take them down for sure, because what's happening now in the debate, it will go over. The question is, will it take 5 years, 10 years, 15 or 25 years?
And what about you, Seb? Do you think the S&D can survive this populist wave?
Yeah, I do. But I honestly feel that we need to change some of the tactics that we're using across the union. I think there are many. I take the example of those who are fighting the populists, Macron, for example. Now, you don't have to be a fan of Macron to say, actually, there are two ways of attacking him. You can say, he's completely useless, he represents a neoliberal model, blah, blah, blah. If you go down that route, you basically discredit everything that he does. Whereas if you adopt his fight against populism, but say, look, he's doing it wrong, we can do it better, here's how you should be fighting the populists. I think that's a much better way of being a political opponent, because ultimately, if many of the leaders across Europe lose their fight against populism, we all suffer, because we end up in a situation where the idea that actually what's more important is who you are, where you're from, what language you speak, the colour of your skin, the religion you have, your sexuality, everything else. If we start dividing ourselves along those lines, everybody will suffer, and that we've got to keep our eye on the bigger fight.
And Charles, as our most senior MEP, do you think the EU can survive this, both Brexit and the wave of populism?
Well, I sincerely hope so. I'm actually quite a big admirer of what President Macron's trying to do to push back against nationalism and populism. Europe has tried this in the 1930s, and it ended in the most terrible war. And certainly my father and grandfather's generation understand what was the impetus behind the formation of the European Union, never again to have a First or Second World War amongst the nations of Europe. And this has been a fantastic peace project, a prosperity project, a security project. And to destroy it, I think, will be not just sad for Europe and also potentially dangerous for all of us, but it'd be a terrible message to the dictators of the world who actually want to unscramble multilateralism and a kind of worldwide system of, governance and the rule of law. That to me would be a major tragedy and send all the wrong signals to the Putins and the Xis of this world who don't like the way the EU is stuck together and basically promotes our common values of democracy and freedom of the press and all the other things that go with being Europeans. And I will certainly fight for it myself.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for being on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.